Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. My guest today is Nancy Messuri. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Irina. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Well, one of your quilts stopped me in my tracks when I was scrolling aimlessly through Instagram, and I reached out to you and I asked you to be a guest of my channel.
Yes,
Tell me how it started. How did you discover quilting? What quilting means in your life?
I started quilting. I was introduced to it, I should say, 35 years ago. That's a long time ago. By a friend of mine who was a former who was also a musician. I was in the Milwaukee Ballet Orchestra as a violinist, and she she got me started, and I haven't quit since. My style has certainly changed over the years. I For a long time was a very traditional quilter with very muted colors and didn't stray from a pattern and that I was using. And that's kind of how it went for a long time. And then I ended up with kind of a life-threatening diagnosis, which I'm completely in remission now. And somehow that completely changed my quilting style and colors and everything. Um, I became I have no idea what my style is. I don't know. It's not quite modern. It's not quite traditional. I really don't know what it is. But anyway, that's kind of how I got from here to there.
It's like uniquely you because you can look at your quilts and you can see your personality shining through to it.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
tell me about quilts in general in your life because you mentioned that you had a quilt gifted to you for your wedding, right?
Yes, by my grandmother, and this was before I understood what went into quilts, and I'm afraid we abused the poor quilt, but we used it. She uh, gave it to us for a wedding present, and there was a lot of applique, which I had no idea what that was. Beautiful quilt. I wish we hadn't overused it.
Well, do you remember like growing up, was that part of something you saw your grandma works on? Like, is
My grandmother, I saw some of what she did. My grandmother was very neat and tidy with her quilting, kind of like I am, always trimming uh, threads off and such. And my mother was much more, she had 10 children. So she was a much more practical quilter, just get it done fast. And I really didn't quilt at that point. I did a lot of sewing. I sewed a lot of my own clothes. Um, but really, like I said, did not get into quilting until that friend introduced me to it. I should say reintroduced me to it.
well, when we
Yeah.
think about quilts, and maybe that perception also changed throughout your life, do you think it's a practical object? Do you think it's something you everybody should be sleeping with, or do you consider it art?
Now I consider it art. My sister says I need an intervention to get some of the quilts out of my house. I can't see them being used anymore. I can see them hanging on a wall as artwork.
Does a quilt tell a story? Like, do your quilts tell story? When you do it, like, do you have a particular recipient in mind, or do you have a particular thing you're trying to say through the quilt?
I don't think I have particular recipients in mind anymore. It's more like the quilts make me rather than I make the quilts. They become a part of who I am, um, and especially expressing myself through color more than anything these days.
Well, what fascinates me about quilting, when I'm thinking of quilting, there's like, I mean, obviously there are a lot of pieces, right? There are different colors. and then there is stitching to attach them together. So there's like all these technical things. But to me, the most fascinating thing about quilting is the planning process. So when you don't follow somebody else's pattern, when it's your pattern, how do you plan it? How much time, how much effort goes into planning of the quilt? Like what percentage of time does it take?
Oh gosh. Sometimes the designs, I feel like they just fall out of me. Other times I have to work like the dickens to get the thing right. There's a lot of planning, a lot of changing of colors, a lot of rearranging of blocks, a lot of uh, working with the border, just to get everything to have it say what I want it to say. And sometimes it doesn't quite happen, but I make it anyway because I learn from it. And other times I'm just really pleased with what comes out, and it's almost an organic process, rather than just thinking through the design process. It just comes to be. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, like as a musician, right? You can be a composer, you can be a musician, and not every musician can be a composer, and not every composer is a great musician.
Yes, yeah.
Where do you see
Um,
yourself, like, and how did that change for you? Because you started with making other people's patterns, so that was the musician part, right? And now you create
yeah,
your own
to
pattern.
create my
When
own.
did that happen? What was that moment when you like, you know what, I'm a designer?
It was really after the diagnosis. Um, I remember they had me read an article that said, this will change you. Having this, it was cancer, having cancer it will change you. And I was kind of reading it like, well, I'm not going to change. I'm still me. But it changed everything in my quilting. All of a sudden I decided I don't want to make other people's designs. I want to create my own. And so I started with it, and I had two starkly different designs right at the very beginning. One was called Snow Mist, and it's a black and white quilt, and uses flying geese blocks. So traditional blocks used in an interesting way. And the other one that came out at the same time was called Hypnotica. And Hypnotica is wild. Both of them use fabrics by Krista Watson, Krista Quilts, but like I said, very, very different. Hypnotica is a design that comes from the outside and goes into the center and then back out again. And Snow Geese it was just simply a design, a simple design. So those were the first two that came out of me.
Do you feel like when you look at other people's quilts, like saw you going to shows where the quilts are presented,
Yeah.
what do you look at? Like, does that give you ideas, inspirations? Do you look at other people's technique? Do you see mistakes? Do you see imperfections? Like, what grabs your attention?
Well, I try not to look for mistakes or imperfections. Um, what I get is impressions, and I don't want to copy anyone, but doesn't mean that a quilt won't inspire me. So I think color is the first thing that really grabs me.
How do you think
So
your fabric stash changed from before cancer and after cancer? Like, where is it now?
oh, I'm looking at my fabric right now, part of my stash anyway, and it's just bright like crazy, all kinds of bright colors. And before it was muted tones, greens, kind of lightish greens, and it just looks nothing like the old me now. Absolutely nothing.
What comes first? Is it the idea of design, or you look at that fabric and you like some color catches your attention and you think like, oh, that would be interesting to work with? Like, how does your brain work?
Usually the design comes first, and then the colors, and that's the part of the designing that's I don't want to say tedious, but the most difficult is going from design to color to a finished design blank to color to a finished color design, I should say. Yeah, it's just usually it's that way. When the designs just fall out of me, it falls out of me with colors already done. I don't know where they came from, but they're already in place.
Do you ever get artistic blocks when you don't know what to make next, when nothing comes to you?
Usually blocks come in the middle of the design process. I've got to start. I'm a Benertex ambassador this year, 2023 Benertex ambassador, and they sent me fabric to use. I'm looking at it right now, and it's not the first fabric they sent. They sent with us in mind, each designer in mind. The second fabric they sent as a challenge, and I'm looking at it, and I just cannot get inspiration for a design for it yet. So I'm supposed to be inspired by the fabric this time instead of the design being first and then the fabric. So I'm drawing a blank with that right now.
Well, how do you deal with that? Like when you don't know like where to, does it stress you out?
Yes, it does. I'll probably sit at the computer and play with different blocks, maybe recreate different blocks into something a little bit different, and see if I can get at least a design to catch my eye that might go with the fabric. But yes, I'm in a block right now.
Well, when you think about your journey as a quilter, do you think you are just starting? Do you think you are in the like the thick of it? Where do you see yourself and where do you see it going?
I felt like an absolute pro before I got a diagnosis. Um, I felt like I knew everything there was to know about quilting. And then I made my first design, my first pattern, I should say. And boy, did that give me a respect for pattern writers, because that was hard. It's getting easier as it goes, but I feel like I'm just kind of just really starting to develop my style.
When you write a pattern, how much do you explain? Because there is this balance between over explaining and not explaining enough and assuming that people already know what they need to know. How do you decide about that balance?
Well, I've decided at this point, the best way to go about writing patterns is to start at the end. Start with the quilt assembly diagram, and then go backward from there, telling just what you need to know for each step. And the hard part is that I use a lot of foundation paper piecing, so there's a lot of explaining of how to do foundation paper piecing for people that may not have ever done that before. It's always kind of nice to have a pattern that doesn't have that in it, because I don't have to worry about writing instructions for that. But I did go from a point of, okay, I got to explain everything. And now I am at a point where, okay, I explain as little as possible to get my point across.
How do you deal with people not understanding your patterns, criticizing your patterns, telling you that you should have explained it differently, like any kind of criticism?
I haven't had any repercussions yet, which shocks me. So nobody is criticized. Nobody has said it doesn't, nobody said anything actually. So I'm not sure what that means. Maybe nobody's buying the patterns or something. I don't know.
Well,
But
do you see it as a business or do you see it as your hobby? Like, where does it stand in your life?
no, I see it as a business, definitely. I just trying to monetize it is the most difficult part. But I've done a few designs for magazines, which helps because they pay for that. And I haven't had any complaints from them about the patterns I submit yet. So I think I'm on the right track.
Where do you see it going? Like, do you have a dream?
I have a dream, I do, of creating a pattern that everybody wants to make. There are patterns out there like that just everybody wants to make. I would like to just catch the nerve of the quilting public. I don't know if I ever will though, because I'm not quite in the center. I'm not really in the middle of any style. So I don't know if I ever will, but it's a dream.
What inspires you? Like, what gives you ideas?
What inspires me? Color mostly. Sometimes I just I'll spend a day just messing around on the computer. Sometimes nothing comes of it. Other times something does, but I just play. And then I pop colors in and see what happens.
Well, being a violinist, I mean, that takes a lot of discipline because you have to practice all the time. You have to learn something new all the time. There's never a point when you can just stop. Like when you achieved everything, it's still daily practice. Doesn't matter how long you've been playing and how good you are. Is it the same thing with quilting for you?
Yeah. By the way, there's a great quote by Pablo Casals, a famous cellist. And he said, somebody asked him when he was in his 90s why he was practicing so much. He said, because I feel like I'm finally beginning to learn something. So I love that quote. It's one of my favorites. And yes, it's very much like music where if you don't keep it up, it goes away. So you have to keep striving and trying. And even if nothing's coming in a day or 2 days or a week, you just keep trying and something will come. Something will grab your attention.
Describe your day, like an average day. How much time do you actually spend quilting?
Oh, well, I usually spend all day in here. Like right now I have two deadlines that I'm working for. One is for exclusively Annie's, and the other one is for Benartex. So I'll spend half the day on one pattern, and I have not started spending half the day on the other pattern yet because I was also working on a different project that's secret sewing. So now I will balance between those two. And usually I'll spend a morning doing one and afternoon doing another, or a morning doing pattern writing because I do that best in the morning, and the afternoon doing sewing. So, but I'm usually in here all day.
Do you ever miss the time when you just had quilting as a hobby?
Sometimes, yes. In fact, lately I have missed it because of the deadlines. If it were just me creating a pattern for a design that I wrote that I was planning to publish, there's no deadline. But now I've got two deadlines looming, and I just finished one deadline, a different deadline. So I had kind of three going at the same time. And at that point, yes, I very much missed it as a hobby.
How do you deal with this like creative burnout when you just wish you could just take time off and not do quilting? How do you
Uh,
get yourself out of that funk?
well, I just keep pounding away. I don't get myself away. I just keep pounding at it until I get the deadlines done, and then I can get to what I really want to do.
How organized are you in all your planning? Like what's going to happen next and what you're going to do after that? How far ahead do you plan?
I actually just I don't really have a plan. I just kind of keep pounding away until I get it done. And sometimes that's not so good because you get your stomach all up in knots and everything, but I just feel like it has to get done.
Well, describe me like the most joyful part of quilting for you and the most stressful one.
the most joyful is when I have a design, it's on the computer or it's on paper on the computer, and I suddenly start seeing it become real with the fabrics. And it was incredibly satisfying to see my quilt hanging in at QuiltCon. That's kind of been a dream of mine. So I was really very proud of that. And stressful, most stressful part is when it's just not coming. It's just not happening.
Well, you mentioned
And
that sometimes you have an idea and you think it's going to be brilliant and then it doesn't happen.
well, yeah.
So how do you approach that?
Well, there are lots of quote designs in I use Electric Quilt to design. And I have lots of folders that have gone nowhere, but they sit there because I think I still might be able to learn something from them at some point, find some way to make it happen. And I can go back and try to get inspiration or see, oh yeah, that did work, or so that's what I do.
Is there some idea that you have or like you've been thinking about that you just don't know how to implement, but it's like floats in your mind as an idea?
No. I I feel like, in fact, I feel like every pattern I do, I learn something from it. I have a new technique that I do. Almost every pattern I do, I use a new technique. And all of a sudden that technique that seemed so hard before is not so hard anymore. It's like, oh, why was I fretting about that? If I get a design I figure out that I really like, I figure out a way to make it happen. I won't let it go. So that's why I've had to learn some new techniques.
Well, when it comes to techniques, like a lot of people are intimidated by the reputation of technique without ever even trying it.
Yes.
Do you have things like this happen to you? Do you ever think like, oh my God, it's going to be absolutely impossible? And
Well, the one that was really intimidating to me was sewing curves. And Tapper Saxton, I can't remember her name, Jenny Haynes. She did a course. She lives in England, I believe. She did an online course, sewing curves without pins, and I didn't believe her, so I took the course because I am a pinner, and she got me sewing curves without pins. So I thought that was pretty amazing.
do you like teaching people how to quilt?
That is something that I am intimidated by, and I have not tried it yet. In fact, I was invited to teach a course at my local quilt store, and I said, well, what would I teach? Because for me, the techniques are, it's like with music. Some people have really good counting skills, rhythm, and other people do not. Well, I have really good technical skills, but I don't realize on the quilts that other people do not, and they need to be told a step-by-step way. So I think I missed an opportunity to do that. But I know I've got to get into that and stop being afraid.
Well, are you afraid that you wouldn't know how to explain it step by step, or are you afraid that you are not on the technical level yet to seem like an expert?
It's not the technical level, so to speak. It's sometimes my words get all jumbled up and mixed up, and I'm afraid that that will happen when I'm trying to teach, or I'll forget words, or I can't think of the word that is supposed to come out. Although I seem to be doing just fine now.
I think that's the next step in your career, in your business.
Yes, it is. It is the next step, and I've got to figure out how to get that started.
Well, when you're thinking about, let's say, next year, do you think about like, I'm gonna go into competitions, I'm gonna submit my quilts to all the shows, like, what are you dreaming about in that respect?
I am dreaming of getting quilts, more quilting shows. I have a couple that have been that I've submitted, but I have not heard back yet. I hope to get another one into QuiltCon. In fact, I have an idea. This is part of the frustration. I've been wanting to do this idea, start designing it, and I haven't had time because of the deadlines I'm on. But yes, I would like to have more quilts and shows. I would love to win a ribbon in a major show. I don't know if that would ever happen. I would like to start teaching with a big gulp. I would like to continue submitting designs to magazines, even though the deadlines are very short and unreasonable. I just want to continue doing what I love, which is writing patterns. Not writing patterns, but designing quilts.
If somebody like years from now discovered one of your quilts, which one would you want it to be discovered? Like, which one do you think tells your story the most?
Well, there would be two. One would be Hypnotica, and the one behind me. The one behind me is made up of one block, cut glass dish, and it gets smaller both horizontally and vertically as we go out. And there's that nucleus in the center. That's the only quilt, the only block that's that size. And I kind of feel like I have that nucleus in the center, but I really need to spread out.
What was the story of Hypnotica? What gave you that idea?
I saw some artwork on Pinterest, and then I haven't found it since. So I haven't been able to acknowledge that person who I got the idea from, which kind of upset me because I wasn't thinking of doing anything grand with it at first. In fact, it was just a black and white design to learn how to use EQ to continue to grow with EQ8. And then I got this idea that I should put some color to it. And I was like, whoa, that is so cool. And Krista Watson saw the design and she said, how about if you put some of my fabrics in there? Which I did, and it became even cooler yet. And she has been a big inspiration for me. She's her whole business is a big inspiration for me. I don't have her big personality or anything, but I would love to.
Well, when you look at fabrics, do you already have like a project in mind when you buy it, or do you just go for the color and know that at some point?
No, I have the design. I go into the quilt store with a list. I need this many yards of this many yards of that. I rarely go and just find fabric and then make something from it. In fact, I've got some stuff up there on my wall that I bought at different shows just because they were pretty, and they're still sitting there. So I go with a list. I go with a plan.
If you don't quilt, what else do you do?
That's a good question, because I'm retired from violin. And sometimes I think when I'm working so hard that I need to stop and rest. And then I'll think to myself, well, what am I if I rest? Who am I if I rest? So I don't rest. I don't know. I don't know who I am without it.
Do you still play violin?
I do not. I can't. I have some neuropathy in my hands, which prevented me from playing well. I would end up in tears at the end of a practice session just because I couldn't play like I used to. So
Are you
it
a
was
perfectionist when it comes to your quilting?
yes. Yeah, all that music perfectionism came over into quilting. Very much a perfectionist.
But you said
Perfectionist
like you
in.
don't know who you are without quilting.
I don't.
When you meet new people, right? Like you used to introduce yourself and say, I'm a violinist in this
Yeah.
orchestra. What do you say now?
I say I'm a quilt pattern designer, and they go, "Oh." um, some people who knew me as a violinist, they get angry. Like, how can you just quit being a musician? But I love this much more than I ever loved music, ever. With all the deadlines and everything, it just I love this so much more. I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be.
How is your family reacting to you being so enthused, so obsessed about?
Oh, well, my daughter, I have a son and a daughter. My son, start with my husband. He's a retired accountant and is now a guitar builder. So he does that. And my son has taken over his accounting business. My daughter is a psychologist, but she has gotten into quilt making, and she's actually designing some of her own quilts now. And she's very enthusiastic about it and very, very supportive. So I try to be as supportive to her as she is to me.
So now she can appreciate the difficulty level of your quilts.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself like when you were working, right? Like you were in some sort of routine and you talk to the same people. Now that you're doing quilting full time, do you find like your communication changed with like you getting new people who wouldn't be in your
uh,
life before?
Somewhat. It's kind of the opposite. I feel like, oh, people just take up space in my quilting space. And so it's kind of, um, I hate to say this, but it feels like an imposition when somebody wants to get together. But once I get together with them, it's very, very nice. Very, very nice. But it's hard for me to get out of my routine.
What's social media for you? Like what do you get from Instagram and other social media platforms?
Um, I use Instagram and I use Facebook. And I find that Instagram, I've curated my audience much better than on Facebook. So it's almost all quilting, which is kind of nice. I do draw inspiration from all the gorgeous quilts I see there. Facebook is I feel like the people on Facebook don't understand quilting, so they don't understand what I'm doing. People on Instagram do, and I understand what they're doing. So Facebook is almost more of a, isn't this a nice, pretty picture? Instagram is a, here's this design, you know.
Do you have any quilt by like somebody else's design that you dream about making one day that you didn't have time yet to make?
There is one design that's one of those designs that everybody had to make. What is it? The ribbons, I can't remember what it's called. Crossing ribbons or something where they're sorry, I can't remember. I would like to make that design one day, if I ever have time.
Do you wish there was more time in a day?
Yes, very much so.
Well, I'm so glad you agreed to be a guest of my channel today and showed me a little glimpse into the world of your quilting and how it was all comes together.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for helping make it easy.
Thank you for being a guest of my channel.